Well, my first interest in nutrition came about from working at the Medical School of Makerere in Uganda. And when I came back to the UK and saw the contrast in ill health in the United Kingdom compared to Africa, I thought to myself, what do we work on? I was to head a new department of biochemistry at the Nuffield Institute of Comparative Medicine. And the big gap, obviously, was the brain. So we set up research in the East End of London to look at maternal nutrition in pregnancy and pregnancy outcome, did a randomized clinical controlled trial, and then consequently, well, now at the moment, I'm at Imperial College at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, where we're working again on maternal nutrition. Nutrition of the mother is important, not only before pregnancy, but also during pregnancy and lactation, because this is the time when the brain of her unborn child is going to be formed. 70% of all your adult brain cells are formed before birth, and anything that goes wrong during that period is permanent and irreparable. And also because maternal health and mental health itself is critically important, because she is being drained of the special nutrients that are important to meet that prodigious demand of brain growth during pregnancy. The most critical nutrients for brain development actually date back to 500 million years ago, when the brain first evolved in the sea. And the astonishing thing is the work that we've done has shown unequivocally that the nutrients that were used 500 million years ago are still used exactly the same way today in the visual system and the nervous system. And the most critical one of these is omega-3 DHA, which you find in, of course, in fish and seafood, and is not readily available on the land food web. Other nutrients that are important to the brain, and the most important ones are iodine, which is well known that iodine deficiency is a major cause of mental retardation. But also selenium, copper, manganese, and zinc are critically important. And again, like omega-3 DHA, the richest food resource for these is in the marine food web. The problems that would arise from deficiency of these nutrients is mental ill health, for a start, and poor cognitive and learning ability. That's the sort of common problem. And the real problem we have today is that mental ill health has now overtaken all other burdens of ill health in the United Kingdom at a cost of 105 billion in 2010, and a cost greater than heart disease and cancer combined, and it seems to be below the radar of all the politicians. I think the reason why nutrition of the brain has been so ignored is that there was so much focus last century on body growth. And it was assumed that body growth was the most important thing and everything else would follow, which is quite wrong, because there are totally different principles in brain growth and body growth. The brain requires fats, the body requires proteins. And if you look at the diversity of animals, you realize that the real priority in our species is the brain. And the responsibility of developing the brain is the mother. And both of them were ignored last century, still are ignored to a large extent. Yeah, I think the most important advice for mothers, both before and during pregnancy and lactation, is to eat fish and seafood as an important part of the diet. The Japanese, for example, the Japanese ladies have eaten fish and seafood practically every day of the week, and it's sometimes more than once a day. And they've given birth to the children that have grown up to have the best longevity, the least major depression, the least coronary heart disease, and the least cancer. dietary advice at the moment, in the UK at any rate, and indeed in most of the world, is still focused on protein. And it's a complete mistake, because if you're a horse or a pig and you want to grow fast, then protein is the thing. But human milk has the least amount of protein of all large mammals, but it has the most of these long-chain essential fats that are needed for the brain, like the omega-3 DHA. So the advice really is to rethink nutrition, education, and to take on board the importance of fish and seafood, which we've forgotten about with the emphasis of going into developing land food systems. The marine food web has been pretty well ignored. The big question is, what are we going to do for the future to meet the population expansion that's going on? And the problem is that the total wild catch of fish plateaued about 10 years ago. We're not going to get any more fish out of the oceans. We're at the maximum level. People say, well, aquaculture will fill the gap. Aquaculture depends on feeding fish with fish. So there's a limit. And feeding fish with chickens, feeding salmon with chickens is not a good idea. So the answer has to be marine agriculture. That is doing what we did with the land 10,000 years ago, but doing it in the sea, doing it on the seabed, developing marine pastures, developing artificial reefs, to use the natural wealth of the ocean waters and the sunshine as energy to develop the grasses, the seaweeds, the kelp, and develop the fish themselves. And this is being done now in Japan and China and other parts of the Far East. We should be doing this now in other parts of the world as well. It's the only way to go forward is going to be agriculturalizing the oceans. The greatest challenge today is mental ill health. And we have to address this with the nourishment of the brain, which has been ignored. So we've got to educate children from preschool right up to A-level on the importance of nutrition and health. That's the first thing. The second thing, that as far as in terms of providing the necessities for brain growth and development, we have to go back to where we were before. And I would suggest that World War II is a good starting point, because during World War II, food policy and agriculture and everything was dependent on nutrition and health. After the war, they lost that concept and went for production and profit. And that has really changed things dramatically. So we've got to think about, where are we going to get our food from in the future? And with arable land really pretty well at a limit in the UK, we have 19,000 miles of coastline, and particularly in Scotland, where we have fresh, clean water. Down in the south, it's not so good because of the pollution, but in Scotland, we've got fresh, clean water. We really now need to start developing marine agriculture around our coastline. The consequences of adverse maternal nutrition and health during pregnancy are usually low birth weight and premature delivery. And the problems associated with that are really that the risk of brain damage rises dramatically as birth weight falls. Take, for example, severe damage such as cerebral palsy. You might expect to find 1 or 2 per 1,000 live births at normal birth weight. But as birth weight falls below 1.5 kilograms and premature delivery is 28 weeks or less, the prevalence of severe damage such as cerebral palsy rises to 200 per 1,000 live births. It's a dramatic rise. And that is really one of the major problems of low birth weight and prematurity. And cerebral palsy is just the tip of an iceberg of many other neurodevelopmental aspects or poor brain development. It's quite interesting that the omega-3 DHA is a nutrient which actually prolongs gestation. So women who eat fish and seafood during pregnancy tend to have longer pregnancies, and the work in Bristol, Alspac, with Joe Hibben and Jean Golding, shows unequivocally that the consumption of fish and seafood during the pregnancy leads to better cognitive, motor function and behavioral outcomes in the children at 8 years of age.